Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody out there listening to our webinar here. This is Fortra leading a panel on cybersecurity topics today, following up our cybersecurity survey. And with that, we have several colleagues from around the country participating in this discussion, which hopefully it's just free-form discussion about several current event topics that we have going on in the cybersecurity industry. To get started, let's do a couple introductions. And Joy, if you'd like to do an intro.
Sure, thanks, Chris. I'm Dr. Joye Purser. I'm the Global Field CISO at Veritas Technologies.
Thanks, Joy. Sandy?
Sandy Dunn, seasoned cybersecurity professional. I'm a core member of the OWASP Top 10 for large language models, and I'm currently CISO at an AI startup.
All right. Jesse?
I am Jesse Miller, founder of PowerPSA Consulting. We help MSPs and MSSPs build and scale their security programs and do it profitably.
He says with a smile. And Nigel?
Hi, Nigel Sampson. Fourth week in with DoseSpot, an e-prescriptions company, as head of cybersecurity and IT, and before that I was with International Data Group.
Awesome. Thank you, Nigel. My name is Chris Reffkin. I am the Chief Security and Risk Officer here at Fortra. And so with that, we have a list of topics to talk about. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of a fun conversation. And to get started, Jesse, talking about artificial intelligence and generative AI, let's kind of get it out of the way so we can cover it since it's a pretty hot topic. Just kind of open door, what scares you, excites you, just your general thoughts about AI and what's happening today.
Yeah, well, maybe let me start with saying, I think what excites me. And I think what excites me about AI is the possibility to improve efficiencies and enhance our daily activities, especially in technology, right? I think I've seen it said several places that AI is not coming to replace you, right? But someone who uses AI to enhance and optimize their workflow is. So I think there's an exciting shift in that knowledge workers are getting an extreme supercharge in the ability to take that knowledge and create force multipliers, in their day-to-day activities. So I think that's exciting. What scares me, I think the flip side of that, hackers and attackers are knowledge workers as well. So they're able to create better phishing emails. We're already seeing that, and leveraging those to move quicker and discover quicker when they're in networks. All those things we're seeing come to bear. So I think those two, the dichotomy of that is both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Anybody have any other thoughts or comments about AI? I know one of the things that I've been thinking about is not just AI itself. I have a question about market relevance and things like that, but that's a little bit outside of the scope of cybersecurity here. But really thinking more about the regulations of it. There's a lot of rush, almost similar to the hype of AI, where it was quickly, ChatGPT, Microsoft, Google, everybody's starting to get really excited about AI, and then politicians, regulators are getting involved to say, hey, yes, we're thinking of, our constituents, making sure that we're protecting you out there. It's like, well, a lot of the regulations today are almost 30, 40 years old that we're relying upon from a security standpoint. How can you quickly regulate something that really is not even, I would say, mature in the market, that it's just really still early in the hype cycle? How can you regulate that effectively? And that's something I've been thinking about a little bit. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or comments about regulating AI.
I completely agree, Chris. I see a knee-jerk reaction to trying to regulate it, but they're trying to regulate it like it's legacy technology. And so my concern is that they will start putting a lot of red tape around it and making it difficult to deploy it, thinking that they're actually improving it when all they're doing is actually making it harder for us to be successful with it. So, I share your concerns.
Yeah, some of the things that I saw specifically out of the EU, but this is not EU specific, is comments from regulators, bureaucrats, if you will, talking about really more the use of it. And some of the uses were mass capture of license plates or facial recognition and things like that. I'm like, well, that's not really like an AI thing. Like that's already happening today. Like it was happening yesterday before quote unquote AI. So I was like, well, wait a minute, that's really more of mass data capture of public, data points, if you will.
Surveillance.
Exactly. And it's not really AI. And something that I was thinking about was like, okay, how would I solve this problem? What would I ideally like to see? And ideally, what I would like to see, I don't know if there's an ideal regulation out there, but something along the lines of if legislatures or those, tasked with regulating technology, if they are required to meet at least, let's say, biannually and review what's going on from a technology development standpoint to see what those concerns, considerations, and kind of have that perpetual review process versus kind of that quick knee-jerk reaction or that quick bang and then, oh, we've addressed it, we can move on to something else now. I'm like, well, we know technology evolves that rapidly. We can't really do that. So to be effective, you almost need to be keeping pace with it versus make a decision, set it, forget it. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't looked at the EU as much, but since the world I play in is SEC regulations, if you look at the proposed rule for AI with the SEC, it is onerous. Might be the word for it. You're talking at least 1 to 2 FTEs just to handle all the requirements that they're asking. Now, I will say that, with the recent SEC proposed rule and where they ended up, I think will walk that back a little bit, but it's coming, and that's a risk to the business, right? So we can talk about, attackers creating force multipliers for their attacks, but I think the pragmatic risks that we're going to see prior to that are the regulatory requirements and the additional financial and operational debt that creates for organizations because of it.
So with that, how is the rush to regulate hurting cybersecurity roadmaps? Jesse, you mentioned you work with MSSPs and things like that. You're putting in multiple, those entities are putting in multiple roadmaps or executing multiple roadmaps.
Right.
How does the compliance, mandate trump what's happening on a security roadmap where it might not be as specific as making sure, auditing controls are in place, monitoring controls are in place, but like you said, it can have a direct business impact from penalties and fines. How is the rush to regulate impeding cybersecurity maturity?
Well, I think it's, when you have 100 balls up in the air, it's that organizations have to make some pragmatic decisions about how are we going to, make money this quarter. So what I think it's doing is pushing from a actual security exercise to a box checking exercise. So a lot of organizations that I see and that I'm working with are in wait and see mode, and let's do the bare minimum to make sure we protect ourselves from a due care perspective because it's so fluid right now. And they're not enacting what I would call good hygiene in terms of treating. I think you can compare it to a trade secrets program. And I think that's the best way to approach AI, is treating it like a trade secrets program. Education is paramount, and getting users more educated on how to use AI rather than, creating a bunch of roadblocks for them. Make the right choice the easiest choice. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing box checking. And so I think that's
Yeah. I was just going to add that having the guardrails in place for the ethical and sustainable use of artificial intelligence, machine learning is really important. Considerations like with machine learning, you need a lot of storage space and compute power. And so where are those power sources coming from? Where are you going to be storing, and what's the cost of doing that? The operation and maintenance, sustainability over time. And to the extent that threat actors are employing AI, for example, for more sophisticated phishing attacks, I think there's an equal opportunity for the good guys to use it for defense. So, for example, and I know, Chris, that we're going to get into the evolving threat landscape, but we know that threat actors are now persisting in networks. I think we've come to the time where organizations need to assume that threat actors are persisting within their network. And so then how do you protect your information with that assumption in place? You've got to have better anomaly detection systems. They've got to be able to understand what is normal behavior for the organization. And I think that machine learning can be employed. I know that Veritas uses this, for example, for next-gen anomaly detection, is to be able to really, using a fine-tooth comb, pick out what is anomalous behavior, and machine learning can be used for that.
Gotcha. I definitely like the idea of the more and more automation and behavioral based patterns, the better. I think it's definitely very top of mind, for me and for my team. So with that, as we keep kind of going down the line here, we're coming off regulations, compliance. Is there a competition? So Jesse, you mentioned, box checking exercise, but security and compliance. Sandy, I'm just curious your thoughts on, is there a competition between the two, or how can they mutually help each other?
Well, I think the interesting thing, if we look at the data breaches, the big data breaches that have happened in the past 6 months, and you look at those organizations, every one of them would say that they've done their HIPAA risk assessment, they're SOC 2 certified, but on the other side of that, organizations that do go through a data breach, if they do have compliance, it's about a 12% decrease in the cost that it cost them for a data breach. So there is a benefit to being compliant. There is, that they've at least done some of the rigor around it, but they're complementary. They're not the same thing. And Jesse, you hit the nail on the head. As cybersecurity, I think, as I've watched, us evolve, as a service to the organization, what I see now is we're now business focused. We've suddenly realized that we can't just keep asking for money and resources every year. Like, we're going to put the business out of business. And so now it's, being able to go in and have that intelligent business conversation where you say, well, here's the likelihood, here's the risk, let's make a good business decision around where we put our investment and our resources.
Yeah, it's like the Thanksgiving dinner at the family's house, right? If we want to sit at the adults' table, we got to stop acting like kids. So I think that's important to remember.
Sometimes the kids' table is more fun, though.
Well, that's why we've been stuck there so long, I think.
So, continuing, we talked, moving away from AI, we can put that to bed. But talking about hype, whether it's hype of new technologies, whether it's hype of new security approaches, or really it's more tool sets. Anybody have any thoughts on how hype in general helps or hurts our cybersecurity initiatives? Jesse, you talk about sitting at the big kids table. I'll leave, anonymous those that are guilty here, but I don't know how many times I see folks send me things, or leaders from other organizations say, hey, check this out. I'm like, it's the latest and greatest shiny object. Do you have all your patching in place? Do you have role-based access control? Do you have security 101 in place? You don't need the next shiny object until you have all the foundation in place. So I'm just curious anybody's thoughts about just hype in the security space, whether it's threat actors, whether it's technology, whether it's security, new tool sets, just your thoughts there.
I think hype is a good thing, but sometimes it can be a distraction. Zero Trust came out, 10 years ago. And I actually spoke to John Kindervag, who actually was the first one to talk about Zero Trust. And he said, whether you like it or not, it is making a change. So I think it is a positive. You just have to understand the philosophy. He said he got it from configuring PIX firewalls and how they set security levels. And that took me back, and I was like, I remember those. And then, the Zero Trust thing is more of a philosophy than it is anything, but it kind of turned into this sales term where all the sales guys are pushing their security products using this Zero Trust kind of thing. So I think it's good for the industry, and I think it's good for people to focus, but they really have to understand what's behind it. How do you get to Zero Trust? What's that all about?
I know that's something, for me resonates very much, the philosophy part. So when it comes to Zero Trust, there's a few other concepts out there that people bring up to me often. And it's like, it's really more of an approach. It's really more that mindset of what you're trying to pursue. It's not, there's no zero trust checklist out there. At least I would say,
Right.
from a compliance standpoint, you can't say, yep, I did these 57 things, I'm now zero trust compliance. Like it doesn't exist.
Right.
And that's the, I think, the, to your point, Jesse, about the big kids table versus the the kids table is, when you talk in the financial world, like you have GAAP practices, you have non-GAAP practices. It's very black and white what CFOs need to execute on. From a security standpoint, it's not black and white. And so then it has that wishy-washy piece of, okay, well, what do I need to do to demonstrate value to the business? But then what do I just inherently need to do to protect the business? And that's part of the challenge, I think, of the job. I think it's part of what makes it a little bit fun too, but definitely part of the challenge there.
Just a little bit on that, like we went out and we pushed zero trust, but no one ever really had the conversation around the friction to the business for implementing that and the cost. And now all of a sudden I've got to have someone configuring that. So, to both your point, I think we're maturing as an entity, as a service to the organization, but being able to come in and say, yeah, we can do zero trust. Are you willing to make that investment? And here's how much it reduces our risk, and here's the cost for us to do that, not only in investment cost, but friction, execution, being able to deploy. When I think about hype, you think about the volume of information that we have to stay in front of. Like, I've been doing this for a really long time. And in even conferences, there are like 4 major conferences a year. Now you can go to a conference every week. There's conferences all over the place. I mean, and I compare it to 2 kids in the back of your car screaming. Like, one kid starts saying, mom, 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 and the next one gets louder and the next one gets loud. So we just get into this never ending, like to be heard, people start screaming louder. Yep. And it's why we all have burnout, and we're trying to, figure out how to stay in front of the noise. The other thing around the hype is, if you look at who's hyping things like 0 days, it's typically the vendor who's trying to solve it. So you got to really take everything with a grain of salt. Like, okay, you can't be fireman and arsonist. You've got to be able to be a credible source, an independent, credible source, before I believe your hype.
Yeah. I have lots of commentary related to that. Well, I'll have to say for another time that's not recorded. But I firmly agree there with you, Sandy, is that there's the hype from a media standpoint, I think is negative hype. I do agree with Nigel, like some hype is good. The hype from a media standpoint is over sensationalizing things that are just matter of fact business that we have to live with day to day. And to look for that next click or that next attention grab, it's not helping anybody. And you're just stirring the pot, to be frank about it. And seen plenty of that, across the industry over the years. And it's I come down to, when I hear opinions of various organizations, government entities and others, I stop and I think, definitely welcome everybody's opinions, but there's certain situations where, like, well, who is this actually helping? Like, if you have this recommendation, is this really bettering me and my customers, or is this the industry, quote unquote, at large? And if so, it's the industry at large. Like, how is it helping them? And I've been really thinking about that a lot lately, as we've had increased scrutiny from our customers just over the years. You can see it with different regulations coming out and their particular roadmaps, which is not a bad thing. But at the end of the day, it's like, how is this actually helping? And I don't know if there's a specific answer to that, but it's one of the things I think about at night, is like, how are all these questions actually helping?
You could say, like, going back to AI, right? All the hype around AI's been around in security for a long time.
Right.
It's only because the media grabbed hold of it, and then you have OpenAI, then Microsoft buys them, and all the debacle around that. Then people are asking questions, what's this AI stuff? And it becomes a big media hype, but we in security already know it's being used. So essentially, it's a lot of algorithms, right? So it's programming. Everything's programming language. So, to me, it's just a better way to get to a certain answer is artificial intelligence. That's all hype, I think, as far as I'm concerned.
I think there's an opportunity with hype. We as security professionals need to be able to communicate clearly that second click down into whatever is the concept. So whether it's zero trust or it's AI, being able to describe a vignette of the problem that is solved and how it's solved, and not in a way that is condescending to the listener or that is too technical or that even, heaven forbid, is boring, but to be able to talk about how that concept can help solve the problem, right? That's the bigger thing that I think is really important, and that's the opportunity that security professionals have, is to be able to communicate that clearly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Joy. As we were talking about that, I was thinking, circling that idea, is that yes, hype is good because it raises awareness, and we need awareness raised because people don't gravitate towards technical items, and that's what the hype is helpful for. But at some point, like as you said, there needs to be a shift to use that hype, Chris, to your point, in a way that's helpful, right? And to get a result. And when we don't do that, we create those two kids screaming in the back of the car, like Sandy said. Right, so.
Yeah, security people are accustomed to being out of our comfort zones, right?
Right.
Whether it's cybersecurity or physical security, and the two are becoming very blurry. We're used to having things explained to us and getting maybe 80% of it, but then sometimes you're very clearly like out of your comfort zone, like, nope, I don't understand any of this. But I would say the general public really just sees it as a turnoff if we get too technical or too stovepiped or go down that rabbit hole too far. So there really is an art in being able to talk about kind of the real world use cases.
One of the big things that I see as an opportunity out in the market or across the industry really is all the security that we talk about, hype, whatever. It's all business to business. It's all commercial, and nobody's really talking about personal security or individual security, or security of the household, if you will. And I think that's a huge opportunity to kind of bridge that gap. And I haven't seen anybody tackle it. I mean, sure, you buy a new laptop, you get an AV subscription for a year for a penny or whatever it is, but that's not really solving the security problem for people at home, because you see, once a month, once a quarter, there's articles about people getting scammed, other bad things happening to individuals, which I think is, to your point, Joy, most individuals aren't that technically savvy. However, they have to be secure, and everybody knows to lock the front door and turn off the lights when they leave home. They don't necessarily know how to do all that with their laptops and personal accounts that they have for various services. And if there's a way to bridge that gap to make security kind of part of everybody's day-to-day lives, I think that could help there. I don't know if there's a silver bullet for it, but that's one of the things I've also been thinking about too, is like how can we just help everybody in the real world, if you will, that's outside of a commercial entity or a government entity.
I couldn't agree more, Chris. I mean, I think about it all the time as I'm trying to keep track of all of my passwords and all, I have my system with all of my email addresses and all my stuff. And I was doing a credit freeze on my daughter yesterday, and I thought, and it was complicated. And I'm a 20-year plus cybersecurity person, and I think, how does a normal person accomplish this? Like there were so many gotchas. I mean, it was Equifax specifically, like they kept trying to sell me services that I didn't want. I was just trying to do a credit freeze. And I thought, this is not ethical. I mean, it's not fair, and we're not helping the people, the general public, with security at all. Even with all of the breaches and fines, how much of that actually gets to the people whose lives were wrecked? I mean,
So I could definitely relate to that, because I did fall for it once. I spent $20 when I shouldn't have, but it was the thing that popped up. I was like, oh, I don't want that. I want that one. And it is confusing. And it's kind of odd too, that when I talk to folks, like, what should I do if this happens? Like, well, do you know about like freezing your credit scores? And I'm like, no. It's like, how does everybody not know about that? Like it should almost be like an opt to unfreeze it versus opt to freeze, just like we would say, like you should have to opt out of it versus opt in. And it's definitely a challenge for people out there, just for the basic day-to-day things.
I think it's something that we can embed in our security awareness training programs, at least in our corporations, where we have an audience where we can share safe password vaults to use. The average person has about 200 passwords they have to manage. So they're looking at password vaults, right? Because gone are the days of sticking a Post-it note under your keyboard. You got too many passwords. It's not going to fit on the Post-it note.
Yeah.
And, I think there's ways to where you can educate people on how to spot phishing. I hear a lot of people actually already telling me about how they're finding phishing emails, whether it's by a suspicious email or the grammar. People are getting educated somehow. But I think as security professionals, we could actually embellish that training with some personal education around security. And some of it's already, it's part of our corporate training, right? We have to teach them how to secure passwords, what a password length should be. So some of it, we can actually, be the good citizen and help train and educate people.
My greatest concern are the elderly and small and medium-sized businesses and the public sector. You all probably know that I was at CISA before, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at Homeland Security in Atlanta, and we saw so much angst in the public sector, like counties and that had the precincts for voter, managing votes, and how they really, really struggled with basic cybersecurity controls because of the lack of resources, the lack of staff who were managing those systems. And Florida is the third state in terms of personal security breaches after California and New York. And that's because there are so many elderly people there who just didn't grow up with internet culture and really are, and I'm speaking on behalf of my own family, are kind of flummoxed by the myriad of things they need to do, just beyond the whole password issue. So I think small and medium businesses really need a lot of help with learning how to prioritize their understanding of security and their investments in just the basics for cyber hygiene.
Yeah.
So is security the cost of doing business, or is it something beyond that? And tie this in with a couple of different topics, but there's a lot of talk in the news, maybe hype even, about like who's doing all the bad things, whether it's script kiddies, whether it's state governments, whether it's hacktivists, whether it's for-profit ransomware gangs. To what degree is this just the cost of doing business and the cost of being a human in the internet age, if you will, versus something broader or bigger? I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that.
I think it's just as people moved to IT and IT became a function of a company, cybersecurity has to be a function of a business. And it is the cost of doing business, just like IT is the cost of doing business. So I think, cybersecurity needs to have a seat at the table, have a seat not just at the executive table, but also at the board table. There's not enough security expertise at those different leadership levels. So I think organizations have to mature a lot quicker. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see a lot more of these huge breaches.
It seems like should be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sandy.
I was going to say, I think it's a sign of, the evolution that, the internet was really this experiment that got loose way too fast, and and security has always been, and that's true with anything, lawnmowers, looms, cars, we always put in safety and security after, food. We put in safety afterwards, but it has reached a tipping point, and it's where I'm optimistic about AI and machine learning, which is now we have a problem in front of us that it has escalated to a point where we have to address, where is the surveillance? What are the best practices? What is ethical? What information are we allowed to collect on people? I'm sure, I had a meltdown when we bought a new truck because I literally was forced to connect it and give out personal information, and you're over a barrel because if I don't give it up, there's features on that vehicle that I can't use, like safety features that won't work. So, it's just, we have a lot of improvements to make. And I certainly, anytime we go to the grocery store, we buy that food, we don't have to check and say, oh, what's the supply chain on this? How do I know it's safe? I think we have a lot of improvements to make so that these tools and resources, that people don't have to be experts to be able to use them, that they can feel some level of confidence that, we're governing it, we're regulating it, and we're providing a service. But we'll all have jobs for quite a while.
I have a funny story for another time about data and security and a delivery room of my oldest daughter. So yeah, funny story for another time. But what came to me is hearing everybody think, Nigel, was that tying a lot of the things that we're talking about together is that, okay, from a regulatory standpoint, if we really want to get serious, and to Sandy, like, how do we holistically kind of address things? If you think about what regulations require, it'd almost be something of the effect of, if you're going to implement a new technology, a new data capture process, something like that, like what's the percentage or what's the means to report that you've factored in security to that? So to your point, to the car scenario, like, okay, so if you have to do this, the auto manufacturer, whomever, has to indicate that they've spent, 3.5% or whatever it might be on a security standpoint, like some minimum threshold to require, so they have to report out. So in the event that something happens, like, you had a minimum threshold to do something. Did you or did you not do that? And that could be a way to possibly affect change. Again, just all of you just made me have that pop in my head here.
That. Like, if I'm trusting you with my stuff, what confidence? Prove to me you're trustworthy. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, in addition to an expenditure amount, it's, as Sandy was saying, prove it to me that you're secure. So if you're a software company, give me your software bill of materials. Or if you're a bank in the EU and DORA, it comes online in January, hey, third party, like software that is critical IT that we've bought, then prove that you've done all these things to secure your software, both in the build process and in the maintenance of it, right? Because it really never ends in terms of vulnerability patching. Or we are forced by this regulation to stop our contract with you. That's basically what DORA says. It has all these explicit, very specific things about these are the conditions, banks, by which you can stop your contract with this critical IT provider, if they're not providing to your satisfaction the proof that they are compliant and secure.
So with that, kind of following up, so Fortra conducted a cybersecurity survey recently, and 2/3 of the respondents said that consolidating vendors was a high priority. And also there's a significant amount of respondents that talked about the risks of longer procurement cycles. And so talking a little bit about vendor security, understanding what you're buying, it kind of all ties together here that everybody wants to streamline their cybersecurity purchases. It's taking longer from a business standpoint, obviously from cost management and things like that. And it kind of ties all together here that, Jesse talking about going to the big kids table from the security standpoint, the big kids need to come to the kids table a little bit of like, hey, you're trying to implement all these processes, consolidate, save money, streamline. We have to move quickly, not just in the business world, but also in the security world is what I'm seeing from the respondents. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts to that.
I do. So Palo Alto Networks Unit 42, a whole year ago, had these predictions of what's going to happen in cybersecurity this year. And consolidation of security vendors was one of them. And I interpreted that to mean that security vendors would consolidate in terms of their companies, or there would be the big fish eating the little fish.
Sure.
But what it can also mean is that vendors come together and pre-integrate their software, pre-integrate the product, so that by the time they then sell that product, the burden of that integration is not on the customer anymore. The security and how well it works has been taken care of by the pair of vendors who come together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've actually had some vendors where they have open APIs and they'll talk about integrations to other platforms. And for me as a strategist, and I look at roadmaps and building roadmaps, I always look at products that can integrate with other products So some of those companies are already doing that. There are others that they don't, they're limited. But I do see that consolidation in the marketplace and, across the roadmap for cybersecurity.
Yeah. I think one thing I've come to say is that the efficacy of the whole is better than the peak of the parts. So if you're looking at point solutions that you want the best in every category, but you're not considering the operational gain by using an ecosystem that interops together, you're missing the forest for the trees at that point.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things I've seen is most technology vendors out there will say, hey, you'll solve 1.5 FTEs or save 1.5 FTEs once you have this up and running. I'm like, what's the lift to get that operational? Like, that's not factored in here. And it's way more than what any vendor is
And
going to tell you.
maintain it and
Yeah.
manage it and feed it. And I know, I totally agree. It really is about effort and trying to, it's not just consolidating the tool, but how am I going to manage it? How am I going to keep it up to date? Who's got to take care of this thing? So yeah, totally agree. I mean, how many of us have been in an organization that we have, so many tools and they're all implemented at 25% because nobody has the time to do it. It's just
100% there. That's one of my philosophies with my team is, hey, let's get all the value we can out of what we have. To Jesse's point about the big kids table, let's prove we're maximizing the value, the efficiency of everything we have before we really want to add something on, even before we get to integrations, that we're taking the most and making the most of what we have, and then going back. I'm like, yep, these are the gaps that we need to fill, versus having half-baked or less technology implementations, because that's just leading to a patchwork of controls, leading a patchwork of ineffectiveness or effectiveness, and it kind of keeps spiraling from there. So as our time has come to an end, I just want to thank our presenters for their insights today and the lively discussion. Hopefully everybody in the audience found our conversation insightful, if not entertaining. And if you have any further questions for us at the Fortra team, please email us at info@fortra.com, and hope everybody has a good rest of their day. Thank you.